represented up here, Lighthouse Community Church and New Life Presbyterian Church. And both of these churches have robust counseling ministries. So can each of you briefly introduce yourself and just your role at your church? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tim St. John. I'm the counseling pastor at Lighthouse Community Church.
My name is Kim Kira, and I help to oversee the teaching ministries at Lighthouse Community Church.
My name is Cathy Chang. I am the director of our New Life Counseling Center. I am also wife of this guy.
Hi everyone, my name is Will. I am the lucky husband of this woman here. I was serving as this lead pastor at New Life Press for about 13 years, but I recently transitioned out, and now I serve as an investment specialist of Geneva Benefits under the PCA.
All right, amen. Well, we're talking about counseling, but we're talking about counseling in a unique context, the local church. And we're thinking about counseling in a gospel-centered context where we're pointing people through the scriptures to Christ. Cathy, can you define for us what we mean by counseling? Just what is the distinction between what we mean by counseling versus what maybe people might think when they hear the word counseling?
Okay. I've been thinking about this. It's been good for me to think about what I do every day. And so I think if you were to kind of boil it down, I would say biblical counseling is a relationship where you walk alongside someone in a time of need. As you said, pointing them to Christ, guiding them through Scripture, with the ultimate goal, perhaps not necessarily of alleviating the suffering, but of clinging to Christ, growing in dependency, growing in intimacy with Him, and of learning to understand their struggle and their suffering through the lens of Scripture. So there's a range there. There's a spectrum in terms of what that can look like in a church. What we represent is more the formal side of biblical counseling, where you sit down and you meet with people. But if you consider even a discipleship relationship, even the conversations that we have with one another as believers, biblical counseling can permeate all of that.
Thank you. Anything that you want to add to the specific definition of biblical counseling? I think, Cathy, that was a robust answer, but nothing.
I mean, I love that. I think what just sticks in my mind is that's image that Harold pointed us to in the previous session of Pilgrim's Progress, like where we just see the fire burning and it's like the worship of God, right? And then like everything in the world, the flesh and the devil are wanting to put out that fire of worship for God. And then Christ is just fueling it with grace on the other side. And I think as counselors, we're coming alongside and saying, look at this grace that Christ is pouring out in your life. And like, look at what His grace in the Scripture, look at His grace at work by the Spirit in your life, look at His grace. And so I think we're just kind of standing in awe of the grace of God alongside them and trying to fuel their worship of Christ. And it's a partnership in that, yeah. Exactly.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the counseling ministries at your specific church. And this might add to that understanding of what we mean by counseling today. So let's start with why and how the counseling ministry started at your church. I mean, were there specific needs within your church? I mean, sometimes I think it's as pastors and maybe lead pastors, you realize that you can't shepherd everyone, so that you're like, oh, it'd be great to start a counseling ministry, a lay counseling ministry. That might be one reason, but that's not the only reason why counseling ministries started. Was it more of a philosophy of ministry for your churches that drove you and led you? Let's start with Kim or Tim. How did this gospel-centered counseling culture and ministry begin at Lighthouse?
Yeah, so we planted our church a little over 20 years ago, and a lot of it was just out of need. I mean, we had certain convictions as to the Bible's sufficiency to speak to sinners and sufferers. But I remember sitting down across from a couple, for the first time, and they met and they needed help. And to be honest, I had just so little to offer them. And so that's when I went back to school to kind of start to think this through and to study counseling. But the one thing that we really felt convicted of is we wanted the people to be able to come to the church to get help. So not only do we feel like the Bible is sufficient, but we didn't want to just send people away and say, hey, we can't help you with your marriage, or we wanted Lighthouse to be a place that could help those who are struggling. And so that was kind of where it all started. And then from there, obviously, training expanded, and we added more counselors. And Pastor Tim was the one that really kind of took it to the next level. But a lot of it was just, how do we help people who are struggling? If they can't find help for their marriage at a church, where are they going to really search for? So I think that's kind of the impetus of it all for us.
How about you, Will?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. If I could maybe attempt to kind of answer that from like 2 vantage points. I think that when you're seeking to develop a counseling ministry in the local church, the one thing organically that should happen is that the senior pastors should have a deep conviction themselves as they follow Jesus. Counseling can be something that you outsource out. So when I was a student at Westminster Seminary, learning this really rich, Reformed, robust system doctrine called Reformed theology, took my first counseling class, and it took that theology and made it very applicable in the everyday matters of life. And that crystallized my own idols, my own insecurities, helped me to interpret the world and conversations and community, and that what happened both globally but also locally. And that began the journey to understand how you could take a gospel-centric theology, but is deeply practical in the everyday, until you fast forward, and around 2020, lead pastor of New Life Pres, then COVID hit. And the cynical side of me was like, I'm tired of dealing with people's junk and all their crap inside of their hearts, and I don't want to do this anymore. And I thought that there will be a difference between leading a church during COVID and leading the church out of COVID. And at some point with the leadership, we're saying, once we're on lockdown here in California, all these issues are going to come out in these families and the sheep of our church. Individually, in marriage and parenting, mental health issues, marriages on the verge of divorce, all these issues are going to come up. So once we reopen church, there's going to be a wave of issues that are going to overwhelm the church. And so we have to kind of think about how can we build a ministry so that it's just not centered on the clergy, but we could create a culture in which we could really love and be able to apply the biblical truth to the community of New Life Pres so that they continue to follow Jesus and live a life that honors and worships God. And so I think that, in a nutshell, is sort of the beginning and sort of the impetus of formally starting a counseling ministry. On top of all the organizational things, you need a budget, you have to have a vision, you have to have a strategic plan, you got to have the right people. But aside from that, I think the heart is really to have a vision for, to elevate Jesus and how that could be applied to the sheep of the church as we limp along together in life.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, just hearing the conversation here, and based on Cathy, how you helped us to understand the definition of counseling. I remember the first being introduced to biblical counseling, going to one of those. It wasn't called ACBC at the time; it was NANC or something. One of the trainings, and then realizing, hey, man, this is really about discipleship, which means even if someone doesn't carry the title of certified counselor, a group leader, a active and healthy member of the church can come alongside, side by side with another person and walk with them. And so in many of our churches, counseling is happening. Maybe we don't formally refer to it as counseling. Can one or two of you speak to that? That when we think of counseling, a lot of times it's already happening in our churches. It's just more formalizing it, organizing it, and giving some rhythm and culture to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say good and bad counseling's happening at our church. Because after service on a Sunday, if someone says, I'm so stressed, whatever comes out of someone's mouth is they're speaking into their life. So if they say, don't worry about it, that says something, and so the way we've seen it is that, if biblical counseling really is just the tools to apply the gospel and the truths of Christ and the glory of Christ to people's everyday lives, then really counseling should be taking place all across the life of the church. So the way that we've kind of seen that fleshed out is we try to encourage everyone at our church to take the counseling class. There was one a while back where we had, I think, like 150 people in the class, maybe 100 from Lighthouse, and I think one joined our formal counseling class, our formal counseling ministry. But for us, we were so excited because the other 99, they're just better equipped to speak truth in the lives of their children, of people in the church, and things like that. And so we've kind of incorporated into almost everything we do. If you hear us preach, we use the term we preach with a biblical counseling bent. just wanting to preach to the heart, talk about idolatry, think about the truths of the gospel, the glory of Christ, those kind of things. When we equip small group leaders or when we equip youth leaders or things like that, we're always incorporating these ideas because we feel like, they're counselors. They're going to be in a small group with our kids, and they're going to speak truth into their lives. And if one of the kids says, I'm depressed or I'm struggling or whatever, can they say something to them? So for us, obviously we do have a formal counseling ministry, and maybe Tim can share a little bit more about that. But as one of the elders, our heart is just really that these conversations are happening all the time.
And maybe if either you or Cathy or Will or Tim can speak to, it seems like what you're describing is not so much this formal ministry, though it is. It's organized. You need to have all the right paperwork and make sure that you're doing things correctly. You don't get sued. Talk to your insurance, all that. But it seems like what you're talking about is a church culture. When you're talking about people who say, maybe I'm not ready to be a certified counselor, but I'm going to attend a class just to learn about these counseling principles, this biblical teaching that helps me shepherd people. Can you say more about counseling as a church culture?
Yeah, I mean, if I could begin, and maybe Cathy can finish that off. I think one of the things about counseling, at least in the context at New Life Pres, was that it was a loaded word. And so some people were confused by that word if it was clinical, medicinal, legally trained counsel, and is that different from biblical counseling? I mean, one thing to keep in mind, at least for ourselves, was that everyone is getting counseled every moment of your life. You are counseling people, and you are getting counseled in the broadest perspective, because whenever you speak or listen to a word, you are a meaning developer and interpreter, so you're getting counseled, especially the younger generation through social media. The question isn't whether you're getting counseling or not. The question is, what kind of counseling are you getting? And then on top of that, to Hanley's question, you could have formal counseling in various ways through trained counselors, through the pastors, through small groups and discipleship, but you want a similar lingo, a framework that is gospel-centric, that is elevating the Word of God, that could be practical and applicable in the context of a local community, and that's more the formal approach. One of the ways that we did it, or when I was a pastor at New Life, was that I always wanted to put it into our core values at the church, and practically, I would always want to preach counseling. And sometimes on the Sunday sermon, I would just say, all right, folks, let's put our counseling hat on right now, and you could talk about lust, and you could talk about power, you could talk about money, and to understand how does that develop into a heart issue that elevates that particular issue to the point of an idol. But we would counsel from the pulpit to help formalize and also institutionalize the culture of New Life Pres. And so from that vantage point, that's kind of what we strive to do. Cathy was the one who actually did the real work and implemented the culture in various ways at our counseling center. So I don't know if she wants to talk to that or not.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you have said in terms of what is the truth that we are speaking and applying. And I think as we've been meeting with people through counseling, I think one of the things that we realize is that for a lot of us as believers, we have good theology. We know what we believe, but there is a disconnect in how we live it out. So when you come up against just the ordinary things of life, and sometimes even extraordinarily difficult things of life, how does that gospel impact how I understand this struggle? So one of the things, and I was talking about this with Will just last night, was as we talk about how do we build a culture where the theology is not disconnected from life and where we learn how to live out and apply it, a big part of that, I think, for New Life was what he just said, is that he preached the counseling and he applied it through his theology, through his exegesis, and then he would bring it home to bear on the lives of our congregation. And that, I think, primed us in a way to be ready to move forward with our counseling ministry. Again, like he mentioned, with COVID, it did bring about a lot of the things that maybe as residents of Orange County, we are good at hiding, covering up, pretending like things are okay. But COVID really brought a lot of those things to the surface. But because I think our leadership and his preaching, New Life was ready to move forward in terms of, okay, how does gospel truth apply to my life? So it was part of kind of our conversation already because of that. And then another thing that we did was when we started talking about developing a counseling ministry, the impetus really came from Will and from our session, our elders. And that was huge. And so when we started offering courses for people to come on board and even just to grow themselves, maybe to become counselors or possibly not, our session, our elders decided that they would also join in on that process so that they could have this common language. And so that's, for us, I think it had to start top down. If it had just been me kind of pushing this vision by myself, I don't know how fruitful it would have been. But for us, we were ready because of all those things that had kind of aligned.
How would you build a counseling culture, or how would you approach casting a vision for counseling cultures uniquely in an Asian American context? I know that's broadly speaking, and I minister in a congregation where there's many who are 50 years old and above. They're not coming to talk to the counselor. They're not talking to the pastor until they're on the verge of divorce, until it's really bad. Then you have multiple generations under that they already go to a therapist, and so they post on Instagram all the time that they're depressed, and it's a whole different spectrum. So within the Asian American church, there's everything from honor shame. It's like if I go and ask for counseling, this is bad. Nobody can know about this. Or if you're younger, I need counseling for everything. No, my brother or sister can't spur me on. I need to go see the pastor. I need to go see the counselor, and I need this constantly. No, you can't graduate me after 5 sessions. This is something that I need to do. So speak to that for a little bit. How do you cultivate a healthy biblical understanding of what gospel-centered counseling is in terms of moving people towards Christian maturity?
I'll start. I just want to say, when we think of a counseling culture, I think first, our identity, we and our meaning, we exist to the praise of God's glorious grace, Ephesians 1:6, right? So our relationships also are an extension of that. They exist for the praise of God's glorious grace. So in the sermon we just heard, how do we get there? How do we get to God's grace personally? It's through sharing weakness. And Pastor Harold did a marvelous job of sharing his own weakness, and we joined him in celebrating grace and worshiping God. And what we do in building a counseling culture is, I think we who are kind of culture shapers, whether we're preaching or we're teaching membership class, Sunday school class, we're training small group leaders, we're leading discussions, we remove stigma and shame that comes down hard on people when they share weakness, and we actually honor people who share weakness, and we explore with them the grace of God. Where is oil being poured? How is worship being fueled? Whenever I'm talking to a church that's trying, one of the things I get to do at Lighthouse is I get to help other churches think through how to build a counseling ministry. And when I'm doing these consults, there's always this aha moment when they're like, actually, this is not just a ministry we're talking about. This is just what life ought to look like. We ought to have relationships where we weep with one another and we share burdens. And I think for so many, they thought that 1 Corinthians 12 passage that says when one member suffers, the whole body suffers. They took it when one member suffers, you just always have to make a referral. Or when one member suffers, that goes to some hidden part of the church and gets talked about. But what does it look like for us to share our weaknesses so that we can proclaim God's grace? Until we get there, until that's demonstrated, whether through testimonies or through the pulpit, and I think grace is going to still stay hidden until we are vulnerable enough to proclaim His grace. I go say one more thing. I think one of the things that was drilled into me in seminary was I have to get out of the way of the sermon, right? I gotta just deliver the package, just preach the word and get out of the way. And I want to say, as pastors, we need to stand under the word and demonstrate for our people how the Spirit is doing surgery on our hearts so we can just proclaim, look at God's grace. That's exactly what Harold did for us in this first session, and that's why it was so meaningful for us. And so I think that's how we're going to shape culture is by first like letting the leaders be unified and demonstrating our all collective need for the grace of God, and then we're going to grow in worshiping God together, which is what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, if I guess to add to Tim's like insightful points, I think one of the helpful distinctions about the doctrine of the church is that there's an organization side of it, and then there's an organism side. And so if you're trying to build a counseling culture, that definitely the organization side of it is the strategy, it's the budget, it's the people. Like, what is your 5-year strategy to be able to have the church have a common language? But to Tim's point, I think anecdotally and a testimony, by way of testimony, as a senior pastor, as leadership, you want to be able to show your church that you believe what you're preaching and you're applying it to your life. And so probably the darkest moment of my pastoral ministry career is 2018-19. Just a lot of changes at church that I led, so sort of self-induced, but just was really at a low point of my walk with God as well as the pastoral ministry. And I say this completely in the veil of sin. At that point, the church was doing as well as it could by God's grace, but I just hated everything about church. I hated God. I hated my elders. I was tired of the members complaining from anything from when the youth group service was to the type of lunch that we would serve, the music. I was tired of hearing complaints, sort of the type of worship we should have for Trinity hymnal to Gregorian chants on the other end. And I was like, I'm sick and tired of this. And every night in my backyard, I would just be by myself, smoking a cigar or having a drink of scotch. And that was probably a low point. By God's grace, I got a sabbatical, and I got a mental health assessment at Kaiser. So God bless Kaiser physicians. I had suicidal ideation. I was thinking about suicide all the time. I was like, I'm not well. And I did this mental health assessment at Kaiser, and they had this scale saying something like 100 is where, okay, you got to get admitted, get on medication, and 0 is you're perfectly healthy, only Jesus gets that. And I was like, I'm definitely in the 90s. And she turned the screen around. I was like, Will, you're a 3. You're mentally very healthy. But I felt really messed up and not very healthy. And so that's when I went to go see a counselor myself to help me kind of that dark season. And so I think to share that with the church and to be open about your idols of success, which is Asian American, you want a bigger church if you're honest. But a conference like this is great. We love each other, encourage each other. But if we're honest, probably a lot of pastors, and maybe it's just me, we're kind of sizing each other up. How big is your church? What's your budget? How many conferences do you get to speak at? How many on your staff? Do you get a sabbatical? Do you get a church car? And so you kind of compare the one another. There's a lot of pressure. You want to break the medium-sized church, so you could say, your church average attendance is 125, but you round up to 150 and say, oh, it's 200. Oh, I have a 300-person church. So there's all this pressure, but to kind of admit all those idols, which I had to, and to be vulnerable about that and to say, yeah, I have a lot of sin, and to let the gospel and counseling speak into this, I think leadership has to show that on the organic side of the church. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear what Kim has to say about this too.
First of all, I didn't know church car was an option, so I think that's my big takeaway.
Just for the record, I didn't get one. Okay. I know churches do.
No, I love what all you're saying about, one starting with leadership. I think when you think of the culture shift, I would think at least in 2 areas. One is the shift towards counseling being something that we all do, so that's one shift. The second is the shift towards people being willing to receive formal counseling, right? And again, with maybe the Asian American context, and that for us was a big one. I think the leadership was on board, and that was big. I think so. 3 of the 5 elders ended up getting master's degrees in biblical counseling. 2 of them are lay elders, so they just did this to be able to minister. And so I think when people saw that, we did certain things just to try to shift the culture. We went to counseling conferences together just to get people excited. You hear us, and that's maybe we make counseling sound okay, but then you hear some of these big name speakers. Let's be honest, it gets them excited. But I think one of the things, and Tim mentioned this, but I think showing testimonies or having people share testimonies of what God did in them through counseling was very powerful for our church. I mean, you have someone come up there and they say, I struggle with pornography and this is what God did. Or we recently showed a couple's testimony at our church for a wedding conference or a marriage conference. And it was an abusive relationship, and both the husband and the wife were there, and they shared, or on video, and they shared this testimony of just what God did in their lives, and what a shocking thing to go up there and say, I was abusive, But you start to have that, and you start to show these things, and it really does, because we're all struggling, and so when you see, wait, maybe there's actual help. I'm not going to just come on a Sunday morning, be a little bit inspired, and then struggle through the week. Maybe the gospel really does speak to my hurts and my sufferings. And so I think, those were some of the things that we try to do, is just to get people to see these things and make it normal. Again, the whole preaching thing, I think, is an excellent example. Using terms, I've had people come into my office and sit down and say, Pastor Kim, my idol is this. It's like, I feel like we jumped 19 steps because I didn't have to teach that, because we use it from the pulpit. People are so used to these kind of ideas. And so I think those are things. And it does take a long time. And so even in your mind, you feel like, oh man, I would love for our church to be like this. We're still growing. I'm sure you guys would say you're still growing and trying to figure this out. But it does take time, but slowly, if you keep at it and you keep these things, it's been neat to see the fruit that God's born from that.
It seems like there's an unplanned theme just in these first two sessions of maybe what the Lord might be revealing to us. We're talking about writing the next chapter of the Asian American ministry. This is off script, I'm sorry. So, but, you heard what Will shared. And Will, if you just know him a little bit from the outside, he's like the most organized guy, right? If there's a will, there's a way. There's an organizational way. If you don't know how to get something done, write a document, bylaws. If there's a will, there's a way. But, you heard him share about his brokenness, and you heard Harold, and, all of us. It seems like as Asian Americans, we were raised a certain way. We were raised to maybe not show weakness, to be successful, to bring honor to our immigrant parents and all of their heavy investment. And, to be honest, many Asian Americans, even those who go into ministry, you reach some level of success. But in terms of reaching that, we're standing there, but we're all messed up. Decades, we're all messed up. And maybe we are competing and things like that, but maybe the next step is looking at ourselves and saying, hey, how can we come together as a community, recognize that even though maybe we've succeeded in the eyes of the outside world, that we are broken, right? And maybe that's part of it, just because you're hearing some of the leaders now share about the toll that life has taken on them to reach the level that you might be thinking, oh man, one day I want to be a senior pastor. You sit in that chair for a couple of days, you want to quit, And so I think that is the reality. But speaking of the issues that I think we have to face in ourselves, I'll start with Tim, because, I think you oversee a lot of this, and then any of you can chime in afterwards. But specifically for Asian Americans, and I know these issues aren't only specific to Asian Americans, but what are some of the specific counseling issues that you've encountered just in the recent years that you've seen dominant? They come up most frequently among Asian Americans in your context.
Thanks, Hanley. Yeah, I think we're in Torrance, kind of that South Bay area. It's predominantly not only Asian American, but also in our church. But I think in the city of Torrance, it's 38% Asian, 38% white. So it's a pretty heavy population of Asian American. Success is absolutely an idol, and so I think because of that, academic success, that's a laser focus for every kid. If you fall short of performing well, then you feel like your security is compromised, your identity is compromised, you're failing to really secure your future family. And so there's a lot riding on performing well. So some of the struggles that, some of my friends who are biblical counselors in other parts of the country deal with, opioid addictions, alcohol, adultery, those things that would be that would slow down your success or your performance, they're not really issues. I've really never had to counsel, very rarely, those types of things. It's more the anxiety, depression, suicidality, domestic violence. Divorce isn't even something we've had to deal with much because of the shame that would bring on the family. So then people, just continue to suffer and sin in silence. And so we're trying to, in some ways, kind of remove that stigma so that relationships can kind of excavate the heart and the life, and we can really see that suffering. And so that's something we're trying to help. Let's talk about, you don't always have to have everything all together, but just all the sins and all the struggles that kind of come with feeling that pressure and that like, I have to make it, I have to be enough, and that kind of crushing weight of that. So I'd say that's the main kind of the overarching thing that we're counseling: shame, anger, anxiety, depression, suicidality, everything that kind of comes with that, domestic violence. Yeah.
I think for us, I would totally agree with Tim in terms of some of the things that are at the core. I think a while back, there was maybe a K-drama or something called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Did anybody watch that? I didn't watch it. I just really liked the title because I think it speaks to kind of where our churches are at in a lot of ways, that for us, it's not okay to not be okay. So now, as counseling is sort of moving forward in our churches, I think that is one thing that is becoming more acceptable, that we can say, I'm not okay. And I agree that a lot of that is driven by, in our Asian American context, performance, achievement, works righteousness, kind of understanding the gospel in terms of salvation, but feeling like I have to do everything else besides salvation. And so that, I think, can manifest in a lot of different ways, in a lot of ways that actually have been surprising for me in meeting with people from our church, because there are the things like anxiety and the depression, the kind of the more acceptable manifestations of that. But we also have come up against people who are struggling with addiction that flows even out of that same heart idol of, I am not good enough, and so this is how I will escape. And so that's kind of, I agree that there is a lot of that underlies it. There are obviously many different heart idols, but I think specific to our Asian American context is that feeling of, I have to be the one to fix this problem.
Yeah. So I'm hearing these themes of like success. I have to achieve something. I'm not good enough. I think the Lord is preparing us to hear the message tonight on the sufficiency of Christ and all the messages that are coming, in terms of finding and becoming who Christ wants us to be and who he's going to shape us to be. This is just powerful. But speaking of Christ, I remember during a heavy counseling season, feeling overwhelmed, and as a pastor, just sitting with members of the church and hearing their burdens. It's so heavy that after a session, I would have to send them out. I would turn around, look out the window. I would literally cry. I had to just cry, and that happened a lot. And I didn't know until I listened to a sermon from a pastor about the counselor and the pastor needs to allow Christ to bear our burdens. Can you speak to that? Because whether you're a pastor or a leader or not, we're all discipling people. We're all going to bear burdens. That's part of substitutionary atonement, right? Their issues become your issues. Your free time, your emotional energy, your investment becomes theirs. There's an exchange. It breaks you where you need to go to Christ. Can you talk about that? How do we even remind ourselves to allow Christ to bear our burdens?
I'd say we need other people to tell us that. Like we need someone else to say, to be close enough to be able to say, you're not okay, and that's okay. And I think when we're at the top tier of ministry often, and as pastors or as ministry leaders, we think we have to just keep it all together because we're kind of at the tip of discipleship. We forget that we need to be discipled, that we need someone pouring into us. And I don't know, about your seminary or ministry training experience, but I was never told, make sure that you remember to be discipled. Or, no one was ever, half of seminary was not focused on just enjoying God. It's all about, equipping you to go out and do and work and perform and serve and being doctrinally orthodox and accurate. And that's all good, but it all needs to point me to Christ so that I'm in awe of him, so that he is huge and I'm growing in my worship of him. It needs to remind me that I have this heart that is so prone to wander and to get lost in the valleys, my own valleys and the valleys of other people, that I need others who can come alongside me, that know me completely and that have permission to walk with me gently back to Christ. So I know they're going to honor me in my weakness and they're going to help me honor Christ. And so that I can kind of get back to this place of, I exist for the praise of his glorious grace. And that's why this thorn is here, is so that I could slow down and see his grace is sufficient. And he is protecting me from pride at the high, and he's helping me find contentment in the low. And so I think we just need other people. There's no formula to be like, okay, whenever you're overwhelmed, do this. Just at all times, be in relationships where you are regularly talking about your heart and where people are actually hungry for your heart. They want to know. And they're not going to let go of you until you really open up. We need people like that in our lives. As pastors, we need people like that we can trust. And I'm so thankful for the people that I have in my life that pursue my heart and make sure that that I know it's okay to not be okay. And that actually that's not what God wants. He wants us to be able to share our hearts so that we can have kind of a psalmic faith where we share all of our brokenness, all our mess, and trust that he's going to work through that to draw our attention back to him. So,
yeah, I love that. And I appreciate what Tim is doing at our church in terms of making sure that our counselors have people that are looking after their souls. I think that's so helpful. I think a lot of it is the same things that we're trying to convey to those that we're counseling, is make sure that we're applying those truths to our heart. I mean, you think of suffering and you think of the sovereignty of God and where that plays into it all, and you're trying to convince them that there's this loving, sovereign God that has allowed this suffering into their life to do some beautiful work, in their hearts, among other things. And I think we need to believe that for ourselves, because I've come out of difficult counseling sessions, and I have to remind myself, like, Lord, that situation, that mess was your grace to me. Like, you're in some way loving me. I don't know exactly what you're doing. Maybe just keeping me humble and reminding me about how little I know. Maybe it's just to depend on you. Maybe it's to be more prayerful. But whatever just happened there, that wasn't just for them and me trying to speak into their life, but that was for me, right? That was your kindness to me in some way. And so seeing God's love and sovereignty come together just in those moments, and that's what we're telling those that we counsel. We're trying to convince them of those same ideas. We just have to remind ourselves of those same truths.
I can add to that. I think very helpful points. I sort of want to combine this question with the one before about what are unique challenges to an Asian American church when it comes to building counseling culture. And then at the risk of overgeneralizing, there in my experience, but also through testimony, there is a little bit of a difference between more Western Anglo churches and more Eastern Asian churches, in this way that my limited experience, but also the stories I hear from more Anglo, and I know we have a very diverse community here, so I want to be careful about this, is that in the more Caucasian Anglo churches, it's harder to build community there because they have a lot of community in different spheres of life: church, work, community, sports. But what has been a blessing to a lot of people who go to more Anglo-dominant churches is that they're very honest and raw about their sins. Even with strangers, they talk about their pornography, they talk about their everyday fights with their spouse, they talk about their kids who are drug addicted, or they have all this mess that they're so open about, deep and vulnerable. But yeah, you may be having a harder time to kind of build a community in terms of doing life and hanging out, going to get a drink or watch a movie. Asian churches, in my experience, are the opposite. That it's easier to build sort of superficial community because it's more the center of all of life. It's our religious life, it's our community life, it's our fellowship. And so it's easier to build some sort of community, but harder to actually get into the deeper issues because of this shame-based honor dynamic that happens in the Asian church. It's hard, the challenge is hard to get into a deeper community to understand what they're going through. So discipleship and community groups is always very superficial. Even some of my counseling situations with members of my former church, it was frustrating because you want to get down to the issue. They set up an appointment and you pray about this and you pray and want to build up just kind of pray for the person you're going to meet. It's like, what's your issue? And literally they're saying, I'm so distraught because my kid didn't get into an Ivy League school when he applied. And that's a shit. In my head, I'm like, what a loser. This is like, I don't want to deal with this right now. Or they say, oh, I didn't get that promotion at work. Or I didn't get the house that I put a bid on. And so those things are kind of a challenge because you want to get to something deeper because those things are real. You have to be gracious and honest about that. But there's a deeper issue that's harder to get at in a more Asian American church. When Hanley asked the question, how do you get Jesus to be the central figure that you cast your burdens on? I mean, they already offer really great answers to this. One of the things that I think that's beautiful about biblical counseling is that you could take this eternal, objective, absolute truth of who Jesus is, the person and work of Jesus, the active and passive obedience of Jesus, the Chalcedonian creed of the makeup of Jesus, and universal, absolute, eternal truth. But the beauty of counseling is that that truth can be applied in its specificity to the unique situation and stories of everyone here, because you have a unique story. Your struggle with lust or power or success is going to be different and variegated throughout, but the gospel of Jesus can be applied specifically to who you are, uniquely you, and to be able to show how Jesus could speak into your issues of shame or your struggles and idols of success. That is very specific and particular to your life story, so that you begin to see your story in the grand story of redemptive history from Genesis to Revelation. I think that's where you can really begin to show that the Word of God, by the power of the Spirit, is living and active and can really be able to speak into the issues that medication and behavior modification are unable to speak into. And I think in that way, in the long run, as you walk alongside the people, limp along with them, you could show them how they could cast their burdens upon Jesus, and He'll carry them through with you.
I think just going back to the question that you asked about, how do we as leaders and pastors, how do we bear up under the weight of people's struggles? And I think on top of what everyone else has already shared, I think one thing that I have been learning personally is to look for the good that God is doing. And there's a couple of aspects to that I think apply to us specifically in the Asian American church. The first is that, and maybe it's just me, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like we are good at looking at what's wrong. I feel like we're good at looking at what needs to be fixed. But sometimes it's harder for us to see what is good and what is God at work, where is God at work here? What is the good that He is doing? So I think that's an aspect where we train ourselves to say, what is God doing? And sometimes it's something small, like they came, and that's good. They continue to struggle and to wrestle, and that's good. They haven't given up. So looking for that. And I think the other aspect of that is to remember to look for the good that God is doing. Because that same heart issue that our counselees wrestle with, which is performance and achievement, we as leaders also wrestle with. And we take the burden of heart change on ourselves. But what that reminds me of, and what I'm reminded of every time I sit in that counseling room, is that it's not about me. It's not my job to change their hearts. It's God who's doing that work. And so for me, one way, week after week, meeting with people who are going through the same struggle over and over, and you don't necessarily see visible improvement every time, is to remember God is doing something, and He's doing something good. And can I set my eyes on that? And that does help me to continue and to persevere.
Thank you, Cathy. Well, in the interest of time, here's what we want to do. We have a QR code that if I can have AVL put up the QR code. A question that we were discussing was, among us, was what if you're sitting in the audience and maybe you're the youth pastor, you're not the senior pastor, you have a different philosophy of ministry, and you're like, I want to start a counseling ministry. I don't know how to start, right? Or you're at a smaller church or a medium-sized church, and maybe you don't have the resources, solo English pastor, something like that, or you're a lay leader, volunteering, you're like, I don't have the resources, where do I start? And something we talked about was, well, it can begin with just a book. It can begin with a book study with one or two people. And so we've asked for some recommendations, but as this is available for you, I'm just gonna go around and ask each panelist, if you had to recommend one book as to where to start, what book would that be? You can't say instruments. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry that there's someone. I would say Caring for One Another by Ed Welch, because it's an 80-page book, It's very short. And it goes through just 8 different ways that churches can build one another's. And it's made to be read out loud, and then you go through the questions together. So there's a chapter like on praying more deeply for one another, and then you pray more deeply for one another at the end of the chapter. So I think just going ahead and like, let's take a step together to make Christ more central in our relationships. So I think that would be the one I would recommend. I would also say that, this is what I meant to say earlier, that the grace of counseling is ongoing in all of your churches. And so what we're talking about is like, not please buy into something new, but let's celebrate the grace of God, and that the work he is doing, and let's lean into that work more. So, yeah.
I would say if you just wanted to look at counseling in and of itself, Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands is a good one. I know we're going to take our whole staff this summer and our summer interns, counseling interns, and all that kind of stuff through Loving Messy People by Scott Mell. And so I'm looking forward to that study. And I would say if you want to take the church through something, I would say Caring for One Another or Side by Side, I think are good books to just get the people to think through the culture of care.
I love both of those books. I think another one that has been particularly impactful for me in more recent years, and maybe for those of you who are kind of wanting to understand what does a biblical counseling perspective on myself and on my congregation members look like, there's a book by Mike Emlet called Saints, Sufferers, and Sinners that does a really nice job of just telling us how do we even think about who we are in Christ. So I really like that one.
For myself, unfortunately, I'm last, so they already took all the good books. I would say start with the Bible. That's a good book to start with that. That might be something to turn to. But honestly, before, I agree with Kim. I think if you want more of a kind of introductory, more formal approach to counseling, Paul Tripp, Instruments. But other than that, I think, Ed Welch, Side by Side. I think that, I love that book, and I think it'll be very helpful and practical to kind of get your feet wet.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. And if you could put the QR code up one more time for those of you who need it. And feel free, if you see any one of us. Why don't you explain that?
That's the one we gave you.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about like what are some first steps. That would be it. So what we did was we just put together. I was speaking to some pastors in China about ministry, and so it was kind of maybe a history, but also just some of the simple steps we took in different phases. So it's not like a timeline or anything like that, but you're like, maybe this is one step we want to. Let's get people together. So hopefully that'll be helpful. I think we put our counseling email in there too. If you have some questions, you want to reach out about that.
There you go. And just as a reminder, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So SOLA, through our articles, we're going to put out several articles on counseling, right, Tim? So.
Yeah, there'll be articles on biblical counseling, how to think through things like referrals, just how do we build this in the church, how do we deepen relationships, and just there'll be some stories of counseling experiences. So hopefully it'll be a blessing and equipping for your churches.
All right, and just a reminder, there are 2 seminars, one today, one tomorrow, led by our brother Jonathan Holmes, and those seminars will be on the topic of counseling. And one of them is on burnout, and one of them is the ministers care. Well, thank you all for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. Let me close our time in prayer, and then I'll transition us. Okay. Father, we just thank you for Christ. We know, Lord, that ultimately you want to use counseling, you want to use other people, you use your word of God to point us back to the wonderful counselor. Father, I pray that wherever we are in our journey with you, that just through this session and through the other sessions later on, that you would continue to remind us to keep your Son central in everything that we do and in who we are. It's in Jesus Christ's name that we pray. Amen.